Just north of the city of Newport, an almost overwhelming amount of nature can be found. Just below the historical Yaquina Head Lighthouse, visitors are welcomed to the outstanding natural area tide pools. Following the steps that lead down to the cobbled-covered beach, Ranger Stacy awaits to introduce visitors to the area and inform them of all the creatures they will soon discover. Walking up to the tide pools, a sense of peace, tranquility, and inspiration sweeps over the visitors with the discovery of the many animals that inhabit this marine garden.
A lot of people do come to the tide pools and think that these animals, because they appear motionless, that they're just almost plants, almost just like fixtures that are just sitting there.
Although they are slow-moving, or not moving at all, it is the results of the elements that they face daily.
When people are seeing these animals, it is during low tide, where the conditions are getting very, very harsh for those animals. In that puddle of water that they have to live in, it's getting warmer because the sun's hitting it. It's getting saltier as the fresh water evaporates off the top, and it's getting less and less oxygen as the animals are breathing it up, essentially. So it's very harsh during low tide for those animals. But when the tide comes back in and it's high tide and times are good, that's when basically all of the action is happening.
Despite their peaceful exteriors, the animals at low tide offer a glimpse to the more complicated, lively world of high tide. They move, they eat, they live, they die.
The anemones that a lot of people do confuse for plants, they are active in regards to each other. Those aggregating anemones, if two clans, you can say, get too close together, they can sense each other chemically in the water, and then it becomes a bit of a battle for space. And they have special tentacles that they can swell up and enlarge, and they basically become weapons. And they just hit each other with these enlarged tentacles and sting each other. And the first person to retreat is kind of the loser, and that's the competition for space.
In addition to viewing the giant green anemones, visitors can enjoy seeing a plethora of vibrantly colored creatures. Gray whales spouting off the coastline, birds battling for territory, and lazy seals napping among the rocks.
I think compared to other tide pools along the coast, the Yaquina Head tide pools are special because they're very accessible. Many other tide pools that you go to, you're kind of having to climb over boulders, and it requires a lot of tricky maneuvering to get to the cool animals. But at Yaquina Head, it's a fairly flat surface, and in a lot of places, the tide pools are just kind of right at your feet.
With its easy accessibility, viewing an abundance of a certain species makes Yaquina Head unique.
The reason why Yaquina Head tide pools are a little different is we see a lot of urchins in our tide pools, more so than you would probably see in other tide pools kind of along the coast. And that is because we have no sea otters along the Oregon coast. Sea otters were hunted to extinction in the early 1900s and haven't been able to come back since. And their favorite food is the sea urchin. So you get rid of all the otters, you start seeing more and more urchins. So our tide pools are very urchin-rich around here, I'll say.
Unfortunately, this hasn't been the only disturbance to the tide pool's ecology.
We have seen huge differences in the tide pools since that sea star wasting syndrome hit. It hit its hardest in 2014, and the disease itself wiped out roughly, I'll say 90% of the sea stars at Yaquina Head, if not more. So what used to be tide pools that were just blanketed wall to wall in sea stars, it then became, you were lucky if you saw maybe 5 or 10 in a day.
As the sea star population decreased, the mussel population grew because they were no longer hunted by the sea stars. Despite several other outbreaks of wasting disease over the past decades, it is believed the population was more vulnerable in 2014 because of their inability to cope with the ocean rising temperature. Even though the threat is starting to pass for the sea stars, we still need to protect the tide pools as they recover.
Treat that space with respect. You're kind of a visitor in the homes of these animals. You know, if you were to go into somebody's house, you wouldn't be throwing around the furniture and kicking things around. And so it's good to kind of treat those tide pools in the same way. You want to tread lightly, try not to step on anything alive, touch gently, try not to stir things around too much. Just kind of respect those animals in their natural space. People should come visit the Yaquina Head tide pools because it's an amazing opportunity to see lots and lots of wildlife very up close. You get to see very alien-looking creatures in their natural environment. This isn't like a touch tank or something like that. This is actually in the wild. And you can come and experience these animals and learn about them. There are rangers always here who can teach you about them and show you these things. It's just a great way to sort of learn about animals in an environment that's probably totally new for a lot of people.
Hundreds of thousands of visitors come to learn and experience the beauty of this outstanding natural area every year. Without the help of people like Ranger Stacy educating the visitors and instilling a value of preservation and respect, the Yaquina Head tide pools would look very different. Feeling a sea urchin hug your finger, watching hermit crabs scuttle from rock to rock, or getting wet feet from slipping into the ocean, a person can be easily transported to another dimension that is bubbling with life, all to be covered up again by the next tide.